Today, we will try to look at the reporting of conflict movement in different perspective, from the reporter's perspective, from the social scientist perspective, and also how a society as a whole can perceive the reports, what's are coming in, and accordingly they can respond to it. And for discussion on this very topic, we have in a studio Dr. M.N. Thakur. He is a associate professor in Jawaharlal Nehru University and teaches political science, and also a known columnist, writes in different newspapers and magazines. So I hope his knowledge of both the world academic as well as of media will help us to understand this topic and a new perspective. So on your behalf, I welcome Dr. Thakur for EduSet lecture on the topic reporting conflict movement, issues and challenges. Welcome, sir.
Thank you, Amanji. What I'm going to do is, I think, two things. One, that first I will see what is this conflict area and what are the special challenges that conflict area throws, and what is the challenge of reporting from this area. And second, I will try to see what are the major issues that comes when we talk about the reporting. The four issues that I have in mind: one is the ideology and the reporter, and the ideology of the reporter in fact. Then second is the capacity of the reporter to grasp what exactly is happening there and the interconnections of the things. Third is how the conflict is being reported, what are the dimensions of the conflict that is being reported. And fourth is the state policy and the conflict. And the fifth would be how over the years, what role does media play in this, because we have been hearing about this, that movements are made and unmade by the media. So we will try to see to what extent media plays that role. So let me begin with the first thing, that is the conflict area. You know, what is the conflict area? There could be a small conflict here and there, but when an area becomes a conflict area, it means that there's either a potential of a conflict emerging in that area, or there is a history of conflict in that area, or there is an ongoing conflict in that area. So the conflict obviously is a conflict between the communities, maybe between the state and the people, between two groups. So there could be many kinds of conflicts, and also the movements. I will take up movements along with the conflict. Movement which is a little longer perspective, which has little longer perspective. It means that conflict is more or less a thing which is a short term thing, and there is a conflict, then conflict is over. But if there is a movement going on, how does media handle the movement? What are the problems? And all this I will talk with three examples in mind. One, of course, the naxal movement, which has been a consistent movement since long. Second one is the communal rights, and communal rights particularly the right prone areas. And third will be the recent anti-corruption movement. So I will try to see what happens with the media in all this, how the media reports all this, and particularly from the point of view of a social scientist, not from the point of view of the media expert, but as a political scientist, as a social scientist. How do we look at this media reporting? How do we judge? Imagine I have never been to a conflict area, but the most important data that I get to analyze, I get it through the media reporting. So how do I look at them? How should I decipher what exactly is happening there, and how do we read between the lines of the media and beyond what media is reporting? I think that is a major challenge that we face. In the conflict area, generally what happens is that there is a very intense discourse going on. There are groups fighting against each other, or the state and the people conflict in which police intervenes. Also in the group fights, police intervenes. So it is a time when there is a hyperactivity in this area, and not only that, each group has its own narrative to give. If you talk to one group, it will have one narrative and you will feel that that narrative is correct. If you talk to the other group, you will feel the other narrative is correct. So both the narratives have some kind of elements of truth. Now the question is that how do we decipher what exactly is the element of truth? That is what we will talk about. Now when you look at the reporter, what is he? What is the concept of a reporter? What does he do? Of course, there is a media system which works in that the reporter who reports is being edited. It goes through various stages, and then before it is aired or before it is published, a lot of input goes into that. But more or less what you see as a reporter is basically one who is giving you the first hand account of something what is happening. So he or she is in the field, constantly facing the challenge in the field of covering maximum things, trying to reach out to the people, as many people as possible, trying to construct an idea and then giving back you to the idea that what's happening over there. So now let us take up the first question on this. If we know what is a reporter, what does he do basically? A reporter is different. Let's also talk about this. The reporter is different than the researcher. A researcher will go there and try to read between the lines, try to go into the details, try to find out the documents, hidden documents, try to excavate something, will actually work hard to make a full story and connect that with a larger story. But a reporter is not obliged to do that. A reporter is basically there just for an event. The event has happened. The reporter is there to cover that event. Will try to talk to some people, of course, but will not really dig out lot of old materials. Of course, these days there are research teams supporting each channel, and the research team collects a lot of materials, but still the researcher's work is very different than the reporter's work. The reporter is supposed to give you broadly an analysis and understanding, but more or less a neutral thing, so that you can make sense of the whole thing by yourself. That's the idea of the reporter. And he is obviously, he or she is temporarily there for some time and no time to go into the deeper concerns, deeper analysis of things available. But nevertheless, reporter's work is extremely important. It's like the FIR in the police, the first hand report, first investigation report. That report becomes the central data for a rest of the time to come to refer to. That report is so powerful report that much of the analysis worldwide will depend on that report. So reporter's work is extremely important. Now let me take up the first thing, that is ideology of the reporter, ideology and the reporter, or ideology of the reporter. You know, no individual can be neutral, particularly in the conflict areas. He can be neutral if he has to, say, report about the film, or he has to report about a seminar, or he has to report about, say, an event where controversies are not allowed, not there. But if somebody is supposed to report a conflict area, there is a possibility that the conflict has an implication for the reporter himself. That is something very important to be kept in mind, that a reporter, when he is reporting in the conflict area, there is a possibility that reporter also has some connectivity with the conflicting parties. Say if there is a Hindu-Muslim communal, right, and there is a reporter who has gone there to report. Now the viewer immediately try to see who is reporting that. Is it a Hindu or a Muslim who is reporting that. So, reporter, though supposed to be neutral, but reporter's ideology is one of the major concern for the viewers. And in fact, since it is difficult to be free from biases, there is a possibility that reporter will also carry some biases. There is a possibility that reporter unwillingly or unconsciously supports one group, one of the conflicting groups, and that is a big problem, because the ideology of the reporter, and what is ideology? Ideology is the worldview of the person, and the worldview of the person is decided by so many things. Now, in a conflict situation where a reporter has a particular worldview and tries to report that, the whole story might look very different than the otherwise if the reporter belongs to the other community. So, I think the ideology of the reporter, whether he is a left or a rightist, whether he is a Hindu or a Muslim or anything else, makes a lot of difference in reporting. Take for example, anti-corruption movement. Now, we have seen n number of reports during anti-corruption movement, and we know that there are some of the reporters who are reporting the movement in a very, very positive way, but there are other reporters who are not so positive. What could have been the reason? I think it is the ideology which is the reason, and ideology is not merely something which you declare that I accept it, I don't accept it, but if you look at the ideology of the English speaking class of India, the channel which runs news in English and the channel of even of the same company which runs news in Hindi, you will find two different kinds of reportings are there, and that is very interesting to note. Not only newspapers, if two newspapers are owned by same business house, but when it comes to reporting, I think the Hindi newspaper reports something very differently than the English newspaper. So, this difference comes from the difference in the ideology of the reporter, and ideology, as I said, is not something which may be very obvious all the time. Ideology can also have very, very incipient form, or ideology may also have a kind of invisible form and keep operating with the people, keep operating in different events. So, one has to look at the ideology of the reporter. Of course, the ideology of the reporter is also guided by the ideology of the channel. Every channel decides what it is going to report, in what ways it will report. So, channels also tell their reporters that you actually have to report in this particular way. But even if it is instructed, I think media, particularly visual media, is such an event, such a thing, that the moment you are supposed to be there in front of the camera and keep speaking, you will be in trouble, because you may speak something which is not desirable. So, a reporter may have her own ideology. A reporter may own the ideology of the channel, and the reporter may consciously avoid talking in the ideological tone, but it is not very difficult to decipher the ideology of the reporter. Even the words the reporters use shows that these words are coming from different ideological trends. So, we have to be very careful about the ideology of the reporter, and it may not be always necessary. Like suppose there was a conflict in Afghanistan, and the reporter was reporting from Afghanistan. Now, though the reporter doesn't have anything at stake in Afghanistan, but it is possible that a reporter has a tendency to support democracy, which he should have in any case. Now, if that is true, then the way reporter will tell us about the kind of politics that is going there, or the kind of things happening there, will be very different than a reporter who supports the American occupation of Afghanistan, means whatever the American presence in Afghanistan or American war for a war against terror in Afghanistan. So there is a possibility that the reporter's ideology influences the behavior of the reporter. There is also a possibility that in fact the reporter's behavior is determined by the channel's ideology. The channel has its own ideology, and that channel forces the reporter to behave like that. Now, these are the possibilities of operation of ideologies. Take the naxal movement. If you are supporter of the left movement and you are reporting a naxal movement, obviously what you will do is you will also glamorize the naxal movement. If you are anti-naxal movement, then you will always degrade everything that is happening in the naxal movement. So the reporter's concern makes a lot of difference, and that is why you will find that in two different language channels there will be different kinds of interpretations of things. And the worst case is the communal movement, because the communal movement is something, a communal right is something in which the reporters are supposed to keep a lot of paces. There is a possibility that a reporter is so much guided by ideology of one religion that it tends to portray other religion in bad form. So there is a possibility of these kind of situations in the conflict areas. So when we look at the reports, we try to find out what exactly is the ideology of the reporter. Does he have an ideology, or is he carrying something that has been spontaneously available to him as ideology? The second thing is grasping what has happened. You know, when something is happening somewhere and you are present there and you are going to analyze that, it all depends on your capacity to comprehend, to know exactly what is happening there. It is possible that there are a lot of data around, but unfortunately you are unable to connect the data. So the reporter who is capable of connecting the data together very quickly will obviously arrive on better analysis. Though generally speaking, a media report is supposed to only provide a kind of information and of course a kind of analysis, but at a very, very simple level. But it all depends on how quickly you are grasping about what is happening. If your grasp is not very quick, there is a possibility that you will miss out the main point. And unfortunately, since it is a conflict situation which moves very fast, you will never get time to go back to it. It's very difficult to go back to that. So, and when media reports something, it is so powerful that people tend to accept that. So therefore, one of the major issues is how does a reporter kind of connect various events to present a larger picture in front of us. And this larger picture is something that people carry in their mind, that people try to talk about, and in fact that becomes part of the subconscious. So it all depends how quickly the reporter is capable of grasping what is happening. So when we watch the reports as social scientists, we try to make a judgment about the reporter. We try to make a judgment, of course, about the ideology of the reporter, but also we try to judgment about the capacity to analyze, capacity to quickly link various things and give us answer to the questions that we raise to ourselves. For instance, recently the riot took place in Bharatpur. Now if you look at the media reports on Bharatpur, you will find that most of the reports are only suggesting that event which exactly happened before the communal riot. Now it is important to report that, but the very important thing is to report the context, to think of the context in which it was happening. Very few channels, in fact, very few reporters, in fact, could tell us that, look, and this was a question in our mind, that look, this is a Mayo community, the community which has a tradition of peaceful coexistence with the Hindus. What suddenly has happened that there is a conflict in this area, and such a big conflict in this area? So what suddenly happened that so many people were killed? Now, if we go by the capacity of the reporter, probably the reporter will try to link this history of Mayo community with the way the problem was being solved by the communities, and then will try to investigate why the solution of the problem failed and what element came inside, if they were not existing already there, to propagate this kind of violence. So one would like to look at the media from this angle, but sometimes this kind of answers are generally missing from the reporter. So what exactly is happening there, what exactly is happening in the field, that is something that has to be known by these people, and they need fairly good amount of intelligence to decipher what exactly is happening. Take for instance the Naxal movement. In the Naxal movement, I think when they are reporting Naxalism, at times they are unable to link that with a larger perspective on Naxalism. They only see the immediately what was happening and how things happened. They fail to really connect that with the social reality that is existing, or connect with that with the impact that it will bring in. So it all depends on what kind of capacity the reporter has, what kind of grasping capacity the reporter has. The third thing is that when the conflict is reported, generally what happens, it is reported in a very negative sense. Obviously all conflicts may not be negative, and even if it is negative, I think in all conflict there are stories and stories which can become very, very powerful story of negation of violence. But what happens is that all channels and the media reporting on conflict does not really take into account things which are not directly related to conflict. They do not assume, they do not accept that there could be some indirectly influencing factors to the conflict, but they have to give evidence and they have to give an argument, so they better choose only the negative elements and the positive elements are left out. I will give you an example of this kind of situation. Suppose we are reporting communal right. Now if communal right is being reported, there is hardly any reporting on where communalism did not take place, where right did not take place, despite Hindus and Muslim population constituting the state. So it is possible that what you look into is something that titillates the minds of the people, that can kind of activate certain kind of thinking in the minds of the people, that does not really go into the deeper analysis. And if you do it in the conflict area, then there is a big problem, because the conflict area is also high alert area in terms of capacity to kill, the people who are carrying the guns and the capacity to kill. So you see that what happens mostly when they are reporting conflict, what they do is they report only the negative part of it. They do not report the positive part of it. So most of the reports on the rights, you will see that there is a tendency to report things which are negative, and there is a tendency to suggest that this negative thing is something that is happening there, whereas a lot of positive things also happen during that time. Now the conflict reporting does not make a balance, generally speaking. That has been a tragedy of the conflict reporting. I'll give you some examples. Look at the example of naxal movement. Have you ever seen any report where it is suggested that Naxalites are also developing certain infrastructure in the areas which they have captured? Very few of them would report that. Very few of them will report that the Naxal belt, like in Chhattisgarh, they are also running their own hospitals. How are they going close to the people? Why this happens? They don't even analyze why in certain conflict areas certain groups are very popular. Because the mandate for reporting is always that you have to get a news, and what is news is always a negative thing in a way. So the big news is bigger negative thing. Something wrong has happened and is supposed to be reported. So conflict reporting, if otherwise you have this kind of reporting, there is not a big problem. You may have this kind of reporting, and media suggests that media has a mandate for developing a critique of the state and of the ruling groups. There is no problem in that. But the conflict reporting is very different than reporting a normal event. The conflict reporting requires a kind of patience and kind of representation of the balanced view, so that there is no recurring impact of that. So that one important aspect is just documenting the other aspect of the conflict, documenting the other aspect of human beings. If that is not done, then, as I said, it is a FIR, first information report. It will never be available to us. The person who is there on the spot is the reporter, the conflict reporter, and if he ignores it, then it will be completely washed out. And therefore you will see most of the writings on communal rights in India does not even take note of, fails to take note of what you call the positive aspects. Take the 1984 anti-Sikh right. In the anti-Sikh right, you will find that n number of cases are there where people from other communities came forward and they saved Sikhs. Now it was hardly reported. Or take the Punjab militancy. During the Punjab militancy, a lot of things happened. If you go to the field work, then you will find that a lot of things happened which were very positive, but it was not reported. So conflict reporting has this tendency to report most of the negative things. The fourth one, the state policy and the conflict. As conflict is a very, very powerful thing, and the state has a direct intervention in that, the state also tries to control the media in this. The state tries to know exactly what is being thrown to the air by this, and also this is a direct intervention. But sometimes people argue that in India now the age of direct intervention is over, because the state cannot directly intervene in the media. Media has taken up an autonomy, and it's only indirect intervention is possible. For instance, the advertisement that the media gets, the support that media gets, that state may force the media to behave properly. But there is also an interesting thing to suggest that so much of competition is there in the media now that state policy may not be, or state's action may not be directly accepted by them. But what happens, of course, is the larger frame of the state's policy. So media normally conforms to the larger frame of the state policy. Media doesn't try to represent something which is countering to the current state policy. So suppose Naxal movement is suggesting that it wants to overthrow the state, and it is doing a lot of positive things, but media will never accept it, because media is following the policy of the state. One of the examples of this is, of course, the Naxal movement itself. You see, in 1960s till 1960s and 70s, media reported Naxal movement with a sense of justice. That Naxal movement is fighting for justice. The state policy probably also was there were two things in that period. There were two things in that period. One was the state was against violence. So the media also reported Naxal movement mainly as a violent movement. But there was a tendency to justify the Naxal movement. There was a tendency to suggest that Naxal movement is struggling for justice, and that actually had a lot of impact on the mind of the youth. So a lot of people from the universities, after reading these reports, joined the movement. But if you look at the reporting in post 80s or so, you suddenly find that there is a total rejection of the Naxal movement. And whatever survives, it survives because, unfortunately, Naxal movement is mainly in the areas which is also stricken by poverty. So therefore, the media reflects sometimes the policy of the state. If the state is keen that certain things should be reported in the media will try to do that. And if the state decides that certain things are not to be reported, media will gradually withdraw from that. But what came as surprise to everybody was the Anna Hazare movement. The Anna Hazare movement, people thought that if it is movement against the state, against the Congress party, for certain kind of law, and the way people interpreted that, and Congress is in power, then probably the media would have been controlled by the power. Is it that media is so autonomous that despite Anna opposing Congress party or parliament, media constantly kept Anna on the forefront? Most of the channels you would find at the time would be 24 hours channel on Anna Hazare. Now, I was listening to one of the journalists from NDTV. She very nicely said, I am unable to understand whether we are making people active or people are forcing us to take up the project on Anna Hazare. Otherwise, there was a larger conception around that Anna Hazare movement was made by the media, and 24 hours channels were continuously reflecting on Anna Hazare, and most of the channels had their own OB vans there, and also they made stages where they would report 24 hours. Anna movement exactly is not a conflict, but it is a movement, and how the movement also is being reported is very interesting. What we saw very clearly is that movement's inner conflict was not properly reported. We also saw that there was a tendency in media to suggest that this was basically a middle class movement. Some of the channels actually did not analyze the class base properly, but kept on saying, oh, this movement is nothing but created by the urban elites and all. So I think there is a tendency to follow the state policy by and large, but at this moment it is very difficult to say if the media actually draws some autonomy from the state. It is possible that media also draws some autonomy from the state and then report things in different ways. But on larger issues, you will find that media always conforms to the state power. One interesting example is the foreign minister of Pakistan who came to India, Rabbani. When she came to India, Indian media kept debating about her dress, her look, her bag, and other things. So as a viewer, as a social scientist, we were quite surprised, because India-Pak conflict is always there, and it was assumed that this lady will come, and she was very progressive. She said that, look, I have come here and we are ready to forget the past and start a new future. But media did not report things very seriously. So we were surprised. And then it seems that this Indo-Pak conflict has many dimensions, and one of the dimensions is the diplomatic war. Some people suggested, in fact, what was happening was that Indian government was not responding to it properly, and probably media got an instruction about it that she is not supposed to be represented in the way she should have been, because they thought that in such a serious situation where India and Pakistan had big conflict, you are sending somebody as foreign minister who has no experience. Now it is difficult to say that whether media worked on behalf of the state, but it is not very difficult to understand that media was behaving in a particular way. And if one argues that probably state instructed media to behave in that way, it would not be very, very surprising. So state policy also matters a lot when it comes to the conflict area. I think the way state adopts the policy towards naxal, if you connect the reporting on the naxalism and the state policy on naxalism, you will find interesting match between the two. More or less, media projects the idea of the state. Now this is something that has to be taken with care, understood with care. Not that I am not suggesting that media is controlled by the state completely. I am also not suggesting that media is completely autonomous from the state. I am simply suggesting that on the crucial issues, Indian state is so powerful and the media is so dependent on the grants from the state that media is told to following particular line, and maybe in the name of the national interest or something, media follows that line. Now something recently happened was again interesting thing, that the Prime Minister wanted to meet some of the media persons, and then those media persons were not very important, powerful media persons, which means that there is a conflict over the media coverage itself, and even the top leaders are not sure how they are going to be represented by the media. So therefore media possibly has derived that autonomy, but whether that autonomy does exist in case of conflict area or not, that I am not sure. I have a feeling that when it comes to the conflict area, then probably media derives bit of autonomy. It is altogether a different thing that conflict reporting in case of naxalism is always anti-naxalism, because not only the state but also the power in India, all kinds of partners in power in India have decided that naxal movement is something that has to be demeaned, that has to be dropped, and therefore you will find that always there is a presentation like that. There could be a normal political conflict in the city, in the state, and that normal political conflict can also be reported in different ways. I will not go into detail of the normal political conflict, but my main concern is to see to it that how does media behave in areas of intense conflict. See, if you have seen the news on various rights, which I think is intense conflict, you will find that the reporters, it also depends on the reporters what exactly is going to be reported. So there is an element of subjectivity, no doubt about it, and that subjectivity is very powerful. Except that when you look at the media from outside, suppose you are looking at the BBC and the Indian media, you will find there is a basic difference between the two. The BBC, to a large extent, whether they are neutral or not, to a large extent it will give impression at least that it is neutral. Even in the conflict areas like Palestine and Israel, which is a major problem for Europe, or say Iraq war, or say a movement in England or in America against the new liberal economy. All these things, They report in a very, very systematic way. Therefore, the Indian media probably has a bigger problem than that. Indian media, on the one hand, is controlled by the individual houses, and the Indian media is, on the one hand, it takes the autonomy from the state, but on the other hand, it is controlled by the state, particularly as far as resources are concerned. All these media houses are dependent for various kinds of resources on the state. Therefore, it confirms the policy. Now, this kind of reporting, ideology biased reporting, if you do not have enough grasping capacity to intensive understanding of the thing and immediate reflection of the thing, or reporting only the negative things in the conflict, or following the state policy, if you have this kind of media, then you are going to be in trouble. The opposite to this is that yes, reporter has an ideology, but he makes his biases either clear, or he doesn't allow his ideology to come between him and the reporting. The ideal thing is that if somebody has capacity to reflect immediately, should be able to analyze what is the situation there. Like something happened, I still remember very interestingly, Prabal Singh, who was reporting from Afghanistan, one of the best reportings that you can see, because the man was not only in dangerous situation there, but also constantly he was connecting things for us, and that became a big resource for many of the researchers. Then it has to be in the conflict situation, it should report. It's a social responsibility of the media to bring in also those things which are generally accepted as good, instead of showing only the danga. Like in case of Bharatpur, it did not really show how they almost avoided the right, because Bharatpur, the Mayo Muslims are there, very peaceful. There has been no history of communal right in Bharatpur. So when there was a dispute on the land, two groups sat down and almost it was decided. Just last moment somebody came and hit the Maulvi, and then the problem began. So it seems that the conflict reporter will have to be very much concerned and sensitive towards the negative and positive element of this. And the conflict reporter should also, the last thing, should be of course following the larger national interest, but at the same time should try to balance its autonomy with the state. Then only you have conflict reporting in India, which can be useful for social analysis, which can be considered as a big resource, not only for the news and views immediately, but also for the long term reporting.
Okay, to what extent the reports we have in the newspaper or in the other things that is taken into consideration, and the things are in journals, they are treated differently by social scientists. So how to make them more credible? What some inputs you have suggested? What 1 or 2, 3 that if included in the media reports, that it could be treated as at par?
See, we treat that report as very important resource, which report is exactly telling us what has happened there. It doesn't mix too much of ideology with it, or it clearly indicates that there is an authenticity of the report. So suppose there is a communal right somewhere, and I am supposed to write a research paper on that. I will read different newspapers and try to see the conflict between different newspapers, and select one of them which can give me most extensive thing without too much of conclusion. Conclusion they should leave to the reader to draw upon. Their work is just to report it properly. So if one is not biased and try to give a report, even if I am biased, I don't allow that to come in between my reporting. I report
just narrate what happened.
What happened.
Okay.
Exactly.
But sometimes it is, as you were telling that they should grasp and tell the situation to tell the everything to the people. Like I given the example of naxalism. So some events occurred. So why this its cause, its impacts, its process of the things. Even in the case of Bharatpur, right, you said that before that tension was simmering, going on sometimes. So this was not reported only after the things followed on. So the reporters also go through this kind of dilemma. How do they overcome, or they can do something so that they could be good for the researcher? But we'll discuss this question. But before that, we take up question from a caller from Haryana. So please ask your question.
कि सबसे पहले हम ही खबर आपको दिखा रहे हैं, एक्सक्लूसिव खबर है ये। आप ये वीडियो सिर्फ हमारे चैनल पर ही देख सकते हैं। तो ये जो होड़ लगी हुई है किस तरह से प्रभावित करती है लोग, तो मतलब जैसे कि कोई खबर है उसको, तो इस बारे में मैं पूछना चाहती हूँ।
ये बिल्कुल आजकल जो एक रूथलेस कंपटीशन है मीडिया मार्केट में, इसमें ये लोग कहते हैं कि सबसे पहले हमारी खबर है, और इसी कारण से क्या होता है, ये लोग खबर को थोड़ा मसाला लगा के भी प्रेजेंट करते हैं, और ये एक अच्छी रिपोर्टिंग नहीं मानी जाएगी जिसमें कि मसाला लगा के प्रेजेंट किया जाए। और मुझे लगता है कि ये बार बार कहना शायद मीडिया वालों को नहीं पता चलता है, लेकिन ये काफ़ी इरिटेटिंग होता है जब लोग देखते हैं कि एक्सक्लूसिव है, हमारी है, और बार बार सबसे पहले हमने किया, सबसे तेज़ हम हैं। ये सब चीज़ें काफ़ी प्रॉब्लमेटिक रहती हैं, और इससे न्यूज़ भी सफ़र करता है, क्योंकि न्यूज़ में फिर ये सेंसिटाइज करने ऐसा उसको प्रेजेंट करते हैं इस तरीके से कि लोगों का उधर अट्रैक्शन बने। ये एक प्रॉब्लमेटिक चीज़ है। मेरे ख्याल से इन लोगों को इससे बचने की कोशिश करनी चाहिए, खास करके कॉन्फ्लिक्ट रिपोर्टिंग में इससे बचने की बहुत ज़रूरत है।
And that is also not in sync with the societal thinking.
Exactly.
Boasting is
not part of our culture.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
not.
So people don't like it. People just don't like it. The
Not
moment-
encouraging.
Exactly.
When you do this, the people take in a negative
Exactly.
way. So, but still, media are doing.
Media
so.
do it, yeah,
It's
does
their
it.
job.
Yeah.
Okay, that's we were talking about the this one making the reports more giving the background, giving the other things, so that one can anticipate, or one can think of that we have to take corrective measures, otherwise this will take ugly turn, like in Bharatpur case.
Yeah, yeah.
So how can this be done?
I think I think when they are reporting, I may not expect them to give this whole thing, but at least what they should do is they should give the clear picture, complete picture of the whole thing. All the dimensions they should try to cover. If they leave it to me to decide, since it is not only researchers, it's also the policy makers. They actually depend on the big
We have
videos.
another call from Haryana. Please ask your question. We got disconnected. We were discussing. Okay.
So I think this is something that is so important that you know, even the policy makers are dependent on the media.
Okay.
They are also looking at, because you are the
Sorry to interrupt. We have. Please ask your question. जी सवाल पूछिए.
got disconnected. It seems.
Yeah.
So I think your social responsibility is to present all the dimensions. Don't give your viewpoint, but if you look at all the connectivity and give that to the public and the policy makers, then it will help them in analyzing the thing. At times, what happens that you don't give for instance, the naxal movement. Suppose naxal movement, Datewala is the best example. Datewala, it was half reported thing. The full report was not available. Media didn't give that. The full report, only some people suggest that there was a.
Let us take call from Haryana. जी अपना सवाल पूछिए.
जी सर, मैं कहना चाहती हूँ कि न्यूज़पेपर में आजकल ज्यादा खबर एडवर्टाइजमेंट आती है, न्यूज़ चैनल्स में भी एडवर्टाइजमेंट दिखाते हैं, और कई बार जो चैनल है वो अपनी व्यक्तिगत सोच डाल देते हैं खबर में। तो और जैसे अनइम्पोर्टेंट चीज होती है, जैसे बिग बॉस में क्या हो रहा है या फिर सीरियल्स में क्या हो रहा है, टीवी पे जो नाटक वगैरह आते हैं ये सब, और जो मुद्दा होता है वो हट जाता है। तो इस बारे में पूछना चाहती हूँ कि ये कहाँ तक ठीक है।
Okay, that what was half reported.
So half reported thing, if the media would have reported about the problems that police was facing there, the new officer who wanted to police hyperactive, the police was also facing a lot of problems. Police did not have enough resources to survive there. One of the changes that the police officer brought, he said that okay, you will get the money, and you decide from where you will get food. Now, can you imagine in a rural area, 100 people are going, they have no idea from where they will get the food. They have the money, but that much resources not available there. So they also did things which are not acceptable. As a result, there was a lot of anger. Now these things, if media doesn't report, then probably policymakers, higher policymakers will also not know. So I think media has to be very careful and also look at this, that there is a social responsibility of reporting that everything that is happening without fearing wastage or without, one has to take that much of pain to report that. That's the main important thing. I'm not expecting them to give you the full analysis. They can't give the full analysis so quickly. But you are the first person and last person there who is connected with the larger audience. So you have to really be very responsible in reporting that.
But the chances are they are not also be having access to such kind of information or such kind of things.
And that's possible. If you don't have access to information, that we can understand. But if you have the information and you try to get the information, if the information is prohibited, then I can understand. But if you try more to get the information instead of quickly being, as he suggested, that quickly trying to become the first to report, instead of that, if you take your job seriously and try to connect everything and then make a presentation, that will make things much better.
More meaningful.
More meaningful reporting.
Okay. So policymakers discuss, they also depend on the media reports, fine. Apart from this, to substantiate these media reports, there are other agencies. In cases of conflict between two reports, media report and other agency reports, the policy is framed and policy is again put into the place, and then social scientists two roles. One is to, before making the policy, they give inputs, and after the policy is framed, they analyze the policy. So sometimes what the result is expected from the policy doesn't come into the fore. Like in the case of Narega, Professor Jendre highlighted in the state of Jharkhand. So the situation we find here that the input which they have from the different sources, they from the policy, and again this is not coming to the desired result, bringing desired results. So where the fault lies? It's in input, in the policy making, or in the media reports.
I think one of the problems is that a lot of people in bureaucracy are saying that the government's other channels of reporting to the government also largely depend on the media.
Okay, they don't do the groundwork.
Okay. And if the media fails to do the groundwork and report like that from there, suppose the person who is posted there is not doing enough labor and trying to collect something and present it, then government also gets the wrong information. There's a possibility that everything is based on the wrong information.
But this is just a gossip has come on the, you are making this a statement on the basis of some studies which have come to the fore.
I'm not making the statement on the basis of on proper research, but
Okay,
what I'm suggesting.
Let's take a question from caller from Haryana. Please ask your question.
जी, मैं ये पूछना चाह रही थी कि एक बार खबर आई थी मीडिया में कि जैसे चंडीगढ़ का मामला था, तो उसमें लड़कियों ने मतलब बदसलूकी करी थी एक लड़की से और उसको जलील किया था और उसका एमएमएस बना लिया था और डाउनलोड कर दिया था। तो मीडिया को ये खबर मतलब दिखा के वीडियो दिखा के पूरे उसमें मतलब लोगों को दिखा दिया था, तो ये सही बात मुझे लगता है कि नहीं है। तो आप इस पर क्या कहना चाहेंगे कि जो इंटरनेट मतलब ज्यादातर लोगों के पास नहीं होता, तो उन्होंने तो देखी बल्कि मतलब पूरी मतलब जो पूरे समाज में ये मतलब दिखाया, वीडियो ना दिखाते खबर बता देते तो ठीक रहता। तो इस बारे में कुछ बताइए।
This is a problem of media ethics, that they are also taking corrective steps, and we have come a long way to remove such kind of things.
I think that is
Yeah.
right. Well, they should have
Yeah,
just
this
shown
should
the
not be. They should put the restraint on this.
restraint on this.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Similarly, in the conflict reporting also, they should put
Yeah.
restraint on the
Making
violence,
sensational.
sensational violence,
So,
and
is this because of we don't have the specialized conflict reporters?
possible. Conflict reporting is a very special thing, and our reporting system, our media has not trained the people in conflict reporting.
Okay, and what is the status of conflict research in India?
See, conflict research also in India has not emerged as yet as a discipline in itself. You have some NGOs like Foundation for Conflict Resolution kind of thing. They publish some journal also. There's small groups, research initiatives are there, but not as a discipline. I think in future we have to think of evolving conflict research very much like disaster research. Because we have to preempt conflict. Unless we preempt conflict and then we know what are the resources that we have to stop the conflict, we will not be able to handle it. Therefore, we need conflict researchers, or we can call it peace researchers, and we also need conflict reporters. I think times to come in next 10-20 years, India will have to spend a lot of money on developing this kind of discipline.
Recently, the talk is going on that the conflict is due to disparity between the incomes of various groups in India, a gap between the rich and poor. So, how you see as a political scientist, is this true, or before that it was said that these are the things because of the lack of political will? Now the shift is changed. They are saying that no, it's because of lack of development in the that regions. What is this?
There are many reasons. Punjab was never underdeveloped. There was no poverty in Punjab when there was a big conflict in Punjab. Possible that in some areas it's the poverty which is causing it, some area it's the uneven development is causing it, some areas neither poverty nor underdevelopment. It is the psyche of the people or the collective consciousness in which they had something, they have lost it. Like Kashmir.
So this is the knowingly shift is being to this knowingly, or it's just evolution?
No, it's also possible that the shift is there to suggest that development is such a big thing that has to take place, and there can be investment on that.
We take up, sorry, I have to interrupt you. We take up last question from the caller. Please ask your question.
जी सर, मैं जैसे बताना चाहती हूँ कि जैसे कई बार मीडिया का गलत यूज होता है। लोग मीडिया का मतलब मीडिया को बुलाकर घर का ही ड्रामा दिखाने लग जाते हैं कि उसने इसको मारा, जैसे कोई बात हो जाती है तो ये मतलब समाज में और भी ज्यादा वो उत्पन्न कर देता है विकार, क्योंकि जो बात मतलब लोगों को या बच्चों को नहीं दिखानी चाहिए, सब देखते हैं मतलब बैठ के, जैसे समाचार वगैरह सब सुनते हैं, तो ये सब नहीं होना चाहिए। जैसे शादी में वो मतलब आ गई, उसकी दूसरी शादी हो रही थी पति की, तो वो लेके आ गई और मारने लग गई उसे, तो ये मतलब इसके बारे में क्या कहना चाहेंगे आप?
दरअसल में बहुत सारी चीज़ें जो स्टेट एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन को करना चाहिए वो नहीं कर पाते हैं, तो लोगों को मीडिया एक तरीका दिखता है। अब मीडिया काम भी करता है। कई चीज़ें अभी हुई हाल फिलहाल में, जैसे कि कोई बच्चा बीमार हो गया और या कोई बीमार है, उसे पैसे की ज़रूरत है, मीडिया ने एडवर्टाइज़ किया और बहुत सारी सहायता आ गई। या कहीं पे अभी कोई बूढ़ा आदमी है, उसको फैमिली वालों ने बाहर निकाल दिया है और बेचारा बाहर पड़ा हुआ है, तो मीडिया ने उसको हेडलाइट किया तो पुलिस आ गई। तो मीडिया का ये पावर है, और कई बार घरों में भी ऐसे मामले होते हैं जिनको बाहर दिखाने की ज़रूरत है, लोगों को जानना चाहिए। ये अलग बात है कि प्राइवेसी का तब तक इनको हनन नहीं करना चाहिए जब तक कि उनकी अनुमति नहीं हो, ये भी नहीं करना चाहिए, और बहुत ज़्यादा इस तरह काम नहीं करना चाहिए, लेकिन कभी कभी इसकी ज़रूरत भी है। कि ये चीज़ें मीडिया में आए, लोग ताकि लोग देखें और समझें कि क्या चीज़ें हो रही हैं.
Okay, the last question I would like to ask you. Recently, Mamata Banerjee gave a statement that if Maoists have power to run, then kill me. So, should this be reported as it is, or the media needed to reframe this statement in a different manner, which does not instigate the other party?
See, you don't have much option when the chief minister of a state is giving a statement, right? And the statement is on the camera. So you don't have much option. Now the chief minister has to think about it. I don't think media can modify it also. Now, what is the relation between Mamata Banerjee and Naxal movement, and with what confidence he has said that? Maybe she thinks that Naxals will never kill her because she has a good relationship probably. So in that case, it can be reported like that. But I don't think media has much control. Suppose you are going live. I am speaking here something, and I am going live. How can you control my statement? What media can do is, media should not repeat it again and again.
And dig the relationship.
And dig exactly. Yeah. What media does actually, the moment I have said this, suppose I have said it out of my my emotional this thing. Now media will start repeating it again and again. Media will immediately call experts on this and will start talking about it. That creates a problem. On sensitive issues, media should not get into these things. The small thing, media will pick up and highlight it so much that becomes a big problem. In fact, the relation between many people gets down to this, that media has projected something like this and it becomes a problem. So I think that's a big problem.
So, well, friends, as we gather from today's lecture that media has its own limitation. Despite this, media has been able to bring out the various evils being practiced in society and that have been solved, and making itself and taking corrective measures so that the credibility must be maintained and doing credible things. So we should not blame the media all the times. We should also take it as their, if we can say, the teething problem, you can say the functional problem which the media face, and they try to bring out the best in to us. That's why the democracy is in vibrant stage in India, we can say. With this word, we would like to conclude the lecture here. And tomorrow we'll look at the government initiative and distribution of resources and how the conflict is presently in the society. So this will conclude here today's lecture, and thank all of you. And on your behalf, I thank Dr. Raman Thakur for giving such a wonderful lecture.
Thank you very much.